Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the C2FO webinar, How to Work With and Lead People Not Like You, moderated by author Kelly McDonald and featuring C2FO associates Lakeisha Scott and Kimberly Jordan. Today's session will cover topics such as why diversity in the workplace is important, key steps to help you lead a diverse team cohesively, and how to interact in tough situations to get the best outcome. This webinar is not intended to be the solution for such a deep and meaningful movement. Rather, it's a conversation of possible actions you can begin to implement into your respective businesses as a place to start or continue to improve your diversity and inclusion position. Because of the number of attendees in this session, your respective microphones have been muted. If you have questions at any time during the course of the event, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of this application window. Our moderators will make the attempt to address your questions as part of the content presentation, and time permitting, they will also address questions that have been submitted towards the end of this event. Let me introduce you to today's panel. Kelly McDonald is a 3 times best-selling author and keynote speaker and considered one of the nation's top experts in diversity, marketing, leadership, the customer experience, and consumer trends. She is founder of Denver-based McDonald Marketing, which has twice been named one of the top ad agencies in the US by Advertising Age magazine. Her 4th book, It's Time to Talk About Race at Work, Every Leader's Guide to Making Progress on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, will be published in June of this year. Lakeisha Scott is a global talent partner at C2FO and is a diverse talent leader with more than 20 years of expertise elevating organizational performance through talent management and recruitment practices. Lakeisha is passionate about diverse thought leadership and innovative acquisition strategies to attract, retain, and promote top talent. She has been instrumental in creating internal and external outreach partners to help socialize the employer brand in ways that benefit both company and customers. Kimberly Jordan is the head of people and culture for C2FO. She has overseen human resources at C2FO during a time when the company has experienced tremendous growth, while also prioritizing diversity and inclusion efforts across its global workforce. Kimberly's 20+ years as an HR leader have been dedicated to process improvements and supporting business leaders in all HR-related matters. She is passionate about guiding teams and building collaboration at all levels. And with that, I'll turn it over to our panel to begin today's session. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thanks to C2FO for hosting this webcast and making it available to the public. I was really struck by the generous spirit with which they said we can open this up to the public and also at no charge. We have just under 1,000 people on the webcast today, and that really delights me and makes my heart happy, because what it tells me about you, the audience, is that it tells me that you are smart, forward-thinking people who are paying attention to the shifting demography around you, the changes around you, and that you want to learn more and some specific skills about how to work with and lead people not like you. I'm also delighted to have 2 HR professionals with me, because usually when I do a presentation like this, it's just me, and I'm not an HR professional. I am a diversity expert, but they have a background that I don't have, and we're going to hear from them, and it's going to be a terrific little conversation, kind of like a little talk show. So let's get started. One of the things I wanted to start with was a little bit of what I call table setting, and that is when we talk about diversity, I find it fascinating that the census has actually been tracking this long before any of us were probably paying much attention to it, with what they call the diversity index. And quite simply, all that means is if I grab any 2 people at random anywhere in the United States, what's the likelihood that those 2 people are going to be of different races or ethnicities? So as you can see, in 1980, if I grabbed any 2 people at random anywhere in the United States, I had a 34% chance that those 2 people would be of different races or ethnicities. Or in other words, I had a 66% chance that they were going to be of the same race, probably white. But look how fast it's changed. In just 3 decades, we went from a 34% probability to a 52% probability. And while the 2020 census has not yet been released, the findings of that, the report, in July of 2020, the census did release their forecast for the diversity index, and it's 65. So what this means is, as of 2020, if I grab any 2 people at random anywhere in the United States, I have a 65% probability that they're going to be of 2 different races or ethnicities. Now, there's 2 clear trends that are happening at the same time here. One is obviously, we're becoming more diverse. But the second is we're becoming more diverse more quickly. So look how fast we've gone from 52 to 65. That's a 13 percentage point gain. And this kind of trend is important to watch because there's a big difference between a fad and a trend. Fads come and go like fashion, but trends don't come and go. They are shifts. And once they shift, they rarely shift back. And as I was preparing for this presentation and pulling together some stats, I came across this one, and it really surprised me in a delightful way, but I want to share it with you. And that is that today, 1 in 6 marriages now is to a spouse of a different race or ethnicity. And what surprised me about it is, I guess, if you had asked me this before and said, what do you think? What do you think the number would be? I would have guessed, based on nothing, I would have guessed 1 in 15 or 1 in 20 marriages. I never would have guessed 1 in 6. And I think what's remarkable about this is it really reflects the way that we are changing in the United States as a society. It wasn't that many decades ago that not only was this illegal, I mean, literally blacks couldn't marry whites and so on, but then even after it was legal, it simply just wasn't done. Well, now, of course, 1 in 6 marriages is to a spouse of a different race or ethnicity. So we are changing, and we're seeing changes in the way that we think about diversity and inclusion and equity. And, I want to throw it to Kimberly right now, because as an HR professional, Kimberly, you and I were talking about some of the changes, and I want you to share with the group what you've seen change and what you see as what we've changed from and to.
Thank you, Kelly. I would like to add a third trend to your list, and that is that of broadening our definition of diversity. For several decades now, the narrow view of diversity is what I would refer to as the big 6.
Okay.
We have often referred to it as race, ethnicity, age or generational differences, gender, sexual orientation, and religion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. But what's it broadened to now? I mean, if you're broadening it, what does it include now?
Well, I think, and I do believe in some of the research we've done and the conversations we've had, the new school or the new diversity definition would be much more broad. Really, Kelly, it's any way that you and I can be different. How are we different from one another? That is what diversity is.
I agree
Here are
with
some
that.
examples, I think, in business, the way it shows up for all of us on this webinar today. There are things that we see in our workplace, introverts and extroverts on the same team. Small business owners have logged in today. We have large corporations and corporate executives also participating. There's those of us from a very small town or went to a small school, and those that attended large cities and large campuses for either our high school or greater education background. We have right brain, which would really be a creative brain, right? Someone that's graphic designer, interior design, a psychologist. And there's also left brain thinkers that come into our workforce. Those would be a lawyer, engineers, or an analyst. So those two individuals come together on teams and think very differently and make decisions in a very different manner.
Absolutely.
There's those of us that like to communicate face-to-face, and those of us that would really much prefer an email, a text, or some kind of electronic communication. I also believe that we have ponderers or decision makers that like to sit in it and think about it for a while, versus those of us that like to come forward, trust their gut, and make a very quick snap decision.
I agree.
There are office workers in our environments, and we also have a lot of workplaces that are made up of remote workers, given the pandemic and everything we've been through globally. We've transitioned, right?
Right.
We also have
before the pandemic, people were working remotely.
Right. The environments have changed for some, and some have been remote in many cases before the pandemic, to Kelly's point. There's also this blue collar worker versus a white collar worker. And I think about that in my background. I come from manufacturing.
Oh, yeah.
So in manufacturing, you have those on the floor. You also have the executive teams and those that are sitting in support functions like myself in human resources that are coming together to do the right thing on one team, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then, of course, there's parents. And there are non-parents, people that come to work with very different goals and very different aspirations.
And different pressures on them. I think this is an interesting one that I think a lot of people don't really think about from a work standpoint. But yeah, I mean, they'd be different. And the whole list is different. This is a great list.
It is a great list. Let's focus on the last one. Kelly, I would like to use us as an example, if you don't mind.
Don't mind.
You and I are both white women.
Yep.
Let's say that we both live in the same zip code, we have the same income level, and we're both working from paper as white women on the same page in the same geographic location. However, are you with me on that so
I'm
far?
with you.
Okay. And the rest of the team as well. However, I think where our differences lie, and this is just because I know Kelly, I have children and Kelly does not. So we are going to come to the workplace in a very different way, make meaningful and important decisions that are different. The pressures on me are different. The priorities for me as a parent are different.
Right.
And that's going to be different for you, Kelly, I would assume.
Yes,
There's
it
nothing to
totally
do.
is.
Right. And it has nothing to do with our race, our age, our income, or where we live. It has everything to do with the fact that I am a parent and you are not.
Right, right. And most of my friends have kids. And actually, I mean, you bring up an interesting point because they really do think about things differently than I do. And they have to. I mean, they have responsibilities in certain areas that I just don't have. And I think that's a great example of illustrating how we can be different. That's not part of your big six, you know, Kimberly,
Right.
the race, ethnicity, and age and things like that. And, you know, if you think about as an audience, all of the different kinds of people that you work with, as we go through this presentation today, and we're talking about diversity and people not like you, think about it in any way that makes sense to you. And, you know, the different kinds of workers that you have. And in fact, I'd actually love to throw it to the audience now and hear, you know, can you think of other ways that we can be different from one another? And if you can, just throw it up in the chat. We'll take a look at that real quick. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's no right or wrong answer. And we'd love to hear how you think about differences. So let's see. Disabilities. Okay, Katie, thank you so much. You're right. We have those who are have disabilities, and there might need to be accommodations that are made to them and for them in the workplace to achieve equity. What else? Let's hear from some of you. Other ways. Pet owners versus not pet owners. Jay, I have to say thank you for that. When we were rehearsing this the other day, I actually used that as an example. Ooh, Steph said only child or multiple siblings. Yep.
Right.
Great.
Right.
What else? Ability to handle stress. Very true. Married versus single. Yes. Politics. Yeah, very weary and very divisive. And it's just, I honestly am almost afraid to put the American flag icon into a presentation anymore. Food preferences, vegan, veggie, etc. How about foreign born and US born? You know, not everybody is, you know, native of the United States. Oh, here you go. Those who have been through trauma, deadly accident or injury. Thank you, Dave and Romeo, for your things. And Dave, I would add to that, those who have experienced deep grief.
Right.
And I think that's different than those who haven't. Melissa, where you're raised regionally, absolutely agree. Amy, age, yep. Anyone else? Personal debt. Michael, interesting. Yeah, that would absolutely affect the way you work, the way you save, the way you spend your money, the way you think about money. That's an important one. And that's a new one for me. I've never considered that. Thank you. Those who have had COVID and those who don't believe in it. Absolutely. Janine.
Very timely. Yes.
Great. Thanks, Janine. Ooh, how about rich and poor? Right. Logical and emotional. Romeo and Tori. How about education level?
Right.
So someone who has a GED is very different than someone who has a PhD. Future oriented versus present oriented. Logical versus emotional. You know, I was doing this presentation one time and I threw it out to the audience like this and somebody said smokers versus non-smokers. And this was when I was doing a live presentation and I kind of laughed because I thought it was a joke. And they said, no, at our company, the smokers actually have to go outside and take a break and they smoke. And so what you have is a group of people who would never otherwise come together because they were from different departments. But they would get out there and smoke and they formed their own little community. Religious versus non-believers. Absolutely. Right. How about, you know, Kimberly mentioned decision-making. I had a boss one time who was very much of that cerebral ponderer. And if I needed a decision on Thursday, I had to get with him on like Monday, give him information and give him plenty of time to absorb it. And then I changed jobs and I ended up with a boss who was like, my expression is, you know, ready, fire, aim. You know, I'd give him an idea and he'd be like, that sounds great, run with it. And I'd be like, don't you want some more data? And you're like, nope, go for it. Ooh, work-life balance versus workaholics. These are all really great suggestions. Penny and everyone else, thank you so much for chiming in. And I think what you're sharing with us is showing us the beauty of diversity, that it can really be, as Kimberly said, any way that you can be different from me. So I'm going to move on from here, and thank you all so much for sharing. But let me move on to something that I think is super important to cover, and that is the benefits of a diverse workforce. You know, the data is absolutely irrefutable on this. Irrefutable. Study after study after study shows the benefits of a diverse workforce. And what I want to honor our HR professionals, whether they're joining us as the audience members, or of course, we've got Keisha and Kimberly here, is HR professionals were hip to diversity for decades before the rest of us caught up. And I'd like to ask Keisha now, like, Keisha, what do you think made the rest of us start paying attention to what you were paying attention to before?
Yes, Kelly, thank you. I think that, you know, when we look at business, it's become very demanding. The best and most competitive and forward-thinking businesses are those that appreciate and value diversity of thought, different perspectives. Everyone is the same, and if people come to the workplace and they're thinking the same, they're solving problems the same, right? So they've got kind of same solutions.
Right.
But if you look at things from a different lens, and someone comes into the business or organization and they really start to ask the question, what if? It leads us to better, more innovative approaches and solutions. And so it kind of keeps us from being in that space of saying, kumbaya, everybody has to think the same and grab each other's arm. And we have that groupthink. Right. It's proven business strategy. And we have to have that competitive edge in this landscape in which we live and we work and we do business, to really figure out ways that we can differentiate ourselves.
I agree with everything that you're saying. And I think, you know, you put together this list, Keisha, and it's based on a number of different studies and the benefits of a diverse workforce. And I think the audience probably has heard many of these, like higher sales and higher profit. But you have a stat, I think, on the actual revenue number, that a study that shows the revenue growth.
Research says if we've got diverse teams and we do business together with diverse organizations, then your profitability will increase by 19%. So proven there, and then just based on the different things that we need to do to solve business problems and be more innovative and creative, it absolutely will yield those better results from a business standpoint.
Yeah, and I want to, you know, this is, I'm not going to sit here and read the list for the audience, that it's been up for a while and everybody can see, but the one that caught my eye, and Keisha and I were, you and I were talking about this the other day, was this one on reduced employee absenteeism. That was one that was fresh to me and new to me. I knew about increased employee engagement, and, you know, engagement always also fosters creativity and productivity and things like that. But I never actually thought about, like, people who are working on a diverse team and therefore engaged show up to work more often than those who don't. And that's a huge deal for any business, don't you think?
I do. I believe that helps with our culture, and the business teams, they value each other, they appreciate each other. And people tend to want to work around people like that, where they feel valued and appreciated. So they're willing to give more. I
agree with that. Another thing that I'd read, and I don't know that we can, like, you know, I can't plant a flag on the actual stat on this, but it was something I read about how those who work on a diverse team actually feel more pride in their company than those who don't. Like, they're actually telling, you know, their friends and neighbors and colleagues where they work, and they're like, and we really, really, you know, honor diversity, and we work with a global group, or we have a lot of different diverse talent, et cetera. And they're very proud of that, and they kind of brag about that. So I think that's a hugely positive thing too. And, you know, back to you, Keisha, just any more thoughts on, you know, what's changed regarding the way that we are now doing business and realizing that this is a tool in our toolbox?
Yeah, it is. And so I would say, you know, that list gives us a really good, healthy landscape of the benefits. So business owners and leaders and managers need to value that list. You know, those are things that really don't cost a lot. It's just making sure, when you think about building your team, make sure that you're filling those teams with diverse talent, because it matters. It matters in business based on representation and all of those types of things. So just want to make sure that that's emphasized when you think about yourself as a business leader and as an owner, to be able to diversify your team.
Segue into what I want to talk about next, which is, just a moment ago, you mentioned different perspectives and people saying, what if? And I think perspective is something that we don't talk enough about when we talk about diversity, is that those 2 people or 10 people who actually can look at something and see it differently and see different angles of an issue or a problem. That's constructive, and that's really helpful. And one thing I wanted to do is share a quick example. It's one of my favorite examples, because you just mentioned, if everybody's the same and they kind of think the same, they come from the same backgrounds and come at a problem or an issue always sort of the same way, they're going to come up with the same solutions, and they're not necessarily going to come up with what if and think differently. So a big part of the benefit of diverse perspectives is that businesses know that with diverse perspectives, they're less likely to miss something big. And the example that I want to give is that of Skinny Girl. So I'm betting that, everyone on this webcast today in the audience has probably seen this brand, is aware of this brand. Even if you've never tasted it or drunk it, you know about it. It's on the grocery store shelves. And I just want to give you the quick backstory on this, because it's fascinating to me. Bethany Frankel, the owner, had this idea that every woman would love to have a good tasting, low calorie cocktail that didn't blow 40% of her day's calories, and so she had this concept, and she went to every single major liquor company in the United States to pitch the idea, every one of them. And every one of them turned her down. Well, she forged ahead on her own and built the brand. And 2 years later, after selling 400 million cases of Skinny Girl, Beam, as in Jim Beam, bought her company back from her for $100 million. The same company that they took a pass on just 2 years earlier. And I don't know about your life, but in my life, 2 years goes by like that. It's just, the wink of an eye. So I think it's interesting, because this to me is a failure of perspective. And here's why. We're never going to know what happened, but here's my supposition. I surmise that she went in pitching this concept to men. And most of these liquor companies are headed by men, and that's just fact. It's not a sexist statement, but here's the difference is women metabolize calories differently than men do. And that is factual. It's just harder for us to lose weight. And especially as we get older, men want to drop 25 pounds and they cut out like 1 potato chip a week and they're down, 25 pounds in a month. And we're sitting here trying to decide if we can have 4 lettuce leaves or 3, for dinner. Right. And so I think she went in pitching this, and it was probably men who were evaluating the idea and said, I just don't know if anybody would buy that stuff, because they personally could not relate. It's what I call focus group of one. Focus group of one is when you project your own opinions and thoughts and ideas onto, one thing, and you're just doing a focus group of one. So I think if they'd had some women around the table, those women would have been like, hold up, are you kidding? I have 700 friends who will absolutely beta test this product for us right now, right? So it was a failure of perspective. So good for Jim Beam or Beam for getting on board and actually snapping up the brand after 2 years, but they did miss out on the first 400 million cases. And I think it was simply a failure of perspective. So, when we talk about our differences, and I love the list that Kimberly gave and all the benefits and everything like that, everybody does sort of focus on the benefits, but I think we should go to a place that a lot of people don't talk about. And that is that when we are different from one another, sometimes that can actually be uncomfortable. And sometimes there's actually friction, right? And it can be uncomfortable, but I think that that's where a lot of people find themselves now. So Keisha, what do you think about that?
Well, Kelly, I know in business, people tend to want to align with everyone else, right? That's always the easiest approach. But people are afraid. Sometimes it's fear to work along someone that's different. It makes them feel very uncomfortable. Yeah. And so workers don't want to say anything, because then it looks as if they are this bad person. It looks or reflects
the problem.
them. Absolutely. So in some cases, you know, it's hard. They struggle with those decisions, and to stand out and be different. And so, you know, the thought is, you know, you really want to make sure that you feel that and you understand it and feel like it's something that's kind of normal and happens within business in that sector. And so, you know, but fear does grip people. And those are things that people have to deal with based on those emotions that come over them.
I agree. Oh, and Romeo just popped in and said it's the culture that makes people uncomfortable. And I do agree with that. I think different companies have different cultures, and, you know, depending on the culture of the company, people might feel more comfortable expressing, you know, different opinions and different thoughts, et cetera, but others, that's just absolutely taboo. And I think, Kimberly, you were going to say something and I cut you off there or something, but
That's okay. I think let's be real about the conversation, right? It can be very risky for employees to speak up. So they're fearing that. People are afraid that if they say the wrong thing or do something wrong, it's better just to say nothing at all. And I think your environment and the culture, to the point of our panelists that spoke in, I think it is important that you set trust and that space for transparency and really being vulnerable to speak up. Right. So I think that's where we need to start thinking through how that shows up in our workplaces.
yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing I would add is, and I can only speak for myself, but I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is an incredibly segregated city then and now. And I was never taught to talk about race. I was never taught how to talk about diversity. I mean, in fact, I was actually instructed not to. So from a skill standpoint, and if you look at this like any other skill and you go, I am so uncomfortable with this. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to try to say the right thing and it's taken the wrong way. So people say nothing at all. And it is risky. I mean, the risk is real. I want to honor that because we all know about people who have said the wrong thing or, you know, whether it was intentional or not, and they lose their job, you know, they speak up and they lose their job. Or maybe they don't lose their job, but they get to, you know, branded as somebody who's not on the diversity bandwagon, or they actually do get branded with a horrible, horrible label like racist or bigot or homophobe or Islamophobe, xenophobe, misogynist. I mean, the list goes on. And so they're paralyzed, you know, they keep quiet. And what I find is that when we're uncomfortable around people, we actually avoid them. You know, we actually try to not interact with them. And I don't think that's good for business. You know, so if you're keeping quiet, you're carrying around this discomfort, and you're also avoiding people that you probably should be having conversations with to foster creativity and innovation, and you're not. And then on top of that, all those icky feelings don't go away. You're still walking around with them and you're still struggling. And so what I want to share with you and with the audience is that if you're ever in that position and you're struggling to work with someone who's not like you don't see eye to eye, there's that discomfort there, that actually makes you normal. You're not a bad person. You're not doing it wrong. You're not alone. We all feel that discomfort. Your discomfort is actually considered normal. Social psychologists say that the most normal thing for all of us is to gravitate to people who are most like us. And one of the examples I'll throw out is, to illustrate this, is picture in your mind, if you would, a chamber of commerce meeting. And it's a cocktail event and everybody's there. And it's a largely, let's say, a group of men and women in their, let's say, 50s. And then you throw one person in there who's 25 years old. What are they going to do? You know what they're going to do? They're going to do what I call the scan. They're going to scan the room looking for the youngest person they can find. They're going to go hang out with them. They don't want to hang out with the 55-year-olds. It's normal for us to do this. So this is normal. The discomfort that you feel is normal. Let yourself off the hook on that if you feel bad about experiencing discomfort. And now what I would like to do is one quick little audience poll, and I love the interaction that we're getting with the audience on this webcast. So here's my question of you, and there's, again, no right or wrong answers, and your answers are anonymous, is when you think of your organization or company or team, the workforce that you have, what level of discomfort would you say exists within the teams? Like none, we're good, or maybe there's some discomfort, perhaps lots of discomfort and the relationships are strained and everybody feels it, or not sure. So the poll is going to come up. Here you go. You can respond. We'll take a look here. Okay. Great. Let's just give this one more moment. So I'm going to vote too. Oh, it says the host and panelists can't vote. Fine. Oh, okay. So here's the results. Okay, we've got these in real time here. Yep. So wow, a whopping 21% of you say really no discomfort. We're good. Congratulations. You can host our next webcast, and and about 65% say some discomfort, and I would have expected that. I would have thought that most people would fall into that. And then 12% with lots of discomfort and strained relationships. So yeah, I think we've got the results there. Thank you. We're just going to keep moving on here. Okay, so if people are afraid to speak up and they know the risk that is there, you know, how do we change that mindset, and how do we foster an environment where people can actually open up and share and build bridges? And Kimberly, let me throw that to you.
Okay. Kelly, I'd be happy to answer that. I think the truth comes down to we cannot have honest conversations unless there's trust on the team. I mentioned that a minute ago. But to make real progress, we have to feel secure enough and be real and candid with each other. The only way to do this and to accomplish that is to create trust and maintain trust.
I agree with that. And not to challenge you, but I do find it interesting that social psychologists have identified that there's not just one kind of trust. There's two kinds. And the first kind is actually called common trust. Common trust doesn't have to be earned. We actually grant common trust to anyone, even people we don't know, every day, almost every minute of every day. So an example that I would give you of common trust that doesn't have to be earned is when you think about driving your car, you have to trust when you're driving that the person on the other side of the road is not going to cross the median and hit you head on. You have no idea who that person is, what their driving record is, if they're texting and driving. You don't know. You have no choice but to just trust that they're going to do the right thing and stay in their lane. If you go to the grocery store and you buy food, you have to trust that the food isn't poisoned. Every day we have to think in this macro way and just trust people that we don't even know. And that's why we don't think about it, because I think our heads would explode. And so that's called common trust. But the other kind of trust, and this is the trust that enters into leadership and especially into working with diverse teams, is called vulnerability trust. And vulnerability trust does have to be earned, but it's worth the effort because it breaks down walls and gets people talking like Kimberly's talking about, but it has to be cultivated. You can't just have the title of supervisor or vice president and walk around to your people and say, trust me. It doesn't work like that. It has to be cultivated and it has to be reciprocated. You can't ask your people to trust you if you in fact don't trust them. And so that's why I like this graphic. And you know, it's an interesting graphic of trust, if you ask me.
It is, Kelly, and I would agree. This is exactly what I was talking about. For this to work, this kind of trust in the workplace, in this example and the graphic, the woman with the apple on her head has to trust that the archer's aim is true, but he has to trust that she is not going to flinch. The only way for this to work is for them to trust each other. They both have to be a little bit vulnerable and open to that kind of trust. The way we work with each other really can build that kind of trust in our workplace. And Romeo on our panel said he feels like that believes and becomes a part of your culture if it starts from the top and goes down. But I think it's both ways, right? We have to have trust in both avenues, and that vulnerability can be built only when it's reciprocated.
Right. And in this case, I mean, when they call it vulnerability trust, you know, I do recognize that they're both vulnerable here. They're making themselves vulnerable because they're dependent on the other's action. Now, one person, you know, said yesterday, I think the woman with the apple on her head is actually a little more vulnerable because she's got, you know, a life and death issue here. But the fact of the matter is they have to trust each other. Again, they're both being vulnerable and saying, I'm counting on you to do your job and I'll do mine. And if we both do our jobs, we're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And if you think about any team that has to work tightly together, I mean, think about a SWAT team or, you know, a military troop or anything like that. They are all trained with their specific roles, but their roles are dependent upon everyone else doing their roles as well. And so, you know, that kind of teamwork is so important. But in addition to fostering or to having vulnerability trust, how does one make that? I mean, again, I just said you can't walk around and tell people, please trust me and I'll trust you back. That's not going to work. So how do we, what advice would we have for the actual leaders on this webcast today who are saying, how do I do that? What do I do? So Keisha, let me hear from you on that.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that, Kelly. I think the most important thing is to talk straight as a leader with your team, and transparency is always valued. They say that anyone can give good news. That's easy, but it's much harder to give difficult news. People avoid it. They dance around the truth. They're hesitant because it's difficult news and it makes people feel uncomfortable, but they shouldn't be. I think the goal would be people can handle the truth. What they can't handle is the runaround or someone avoid telling them really what's, up front and what's in front of them. So transparency, speaking truth to your team members is absolutely the route to go.
I agree with that. And I think that people feel respected, Keisha, when you level with them, even to your point, when you have difficult truth, and it's been a difficult year, right? So companies have had to reduce their workforce, they've laid people off, et cetera. And when you just sit down with people and you tell them, here's what's going on, and I wanted to share this with you, and I wanted you to hear it from me, to your point, people can actually handle the truth. Oh, Tori said the anxiety of the runaround is so much worse than the truth. Agree.
Yes.
Completely agree. And in fact, what I would also add to that, Tori and Keisha, is if you don't tell them everything, they fill in the blanks in their minds with the worst case scenario. And
Absolutely, Kelly. And when you're dodgy, that creates mistrust. And so nothing will erode trust faster than people wondering what you're not telling them. So it's better to just get the truth out there, be transparent and not avoid it, but just be upfront and let people know so that they don't have all those assumptions and other things out there wandering amongst the team and the business. It's to really,
say that again, what you just said, nothing will erode trust. I want to hear that again.
Nothing will erode trust faster than people wondering what you're not telling them. Right. And so again, being truthful, being transparent, talking straight, it's absolutely important and valued.
Completely agree. And, I think they understand when you're going back to the difficult truth. I had a boss one time who had to sit me down and that's how he started. He said, Kelly, sit down. I have some difficult news. And he was telling me about layoffs within the company that were going to affect my department, et cetera. And number one, I had a natural reaction to that. So if you have to give your people difficult news, let them react. I mean, we're not robots, we're human beings. But number two was a week later when the smoke had cleared and my emotional state had sort of, stabilized. I didn't like the news that he shared with me any more than I did the week before. But what I remember thinking was, I can trust this guy to tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And, so even when he's telling me bad news, I can trust that he's leveling with me. And I did feel respected. The other thing I would say to all the audience members here is a key part of that vulnerability trust, in addition to talking straight, is to use simple language. And I find it interesting that in this world of, business buzzword bingo, when everybody's trying to throw out the most impressive word they can in a meeting to, impress their colleagues or whatever, that the largest, most successful companies, when the chips are down and they truly have a problem that they have to solve, they revert to simple language, not business buzzword bingo. So let me give you an example of that. And that is a client of mine, a major automotive manufacturer. So they will tell you that they don't sell cars, they make cars, and that their dealers sell cars. So they're incredibly dependent on their dealers to have a successful relationship of manufacturer and distributor. And they were having a truck problem. And when truck sales are off, in this particular case, everything is off from a profit standpoint, because you can't make up with less expensive vehicles on the profit. It's just not there. So what they did was they called together the top 30 truck dealers in the country to headquarters. They had a special meeting. I was there, and it went down exactly like this. The senior VP of sales walked into the room and thanked the 30 dealers for coming, and then opened the meeting with, we can't hit our sales numbers without hitting our truck numbers. Now, you don't have to be an automotive professional to understand what the issue is. Everybody on this webcast can completely understand and grasp what's going on. We can't hit our sales numbers without hitting our truck numbers. So the dealers kind of nodded and took that in, pondered that for a moment, and then they followed it up with, so what do you need from us to help you sell more trucks? Well, the dealers put their heads together for 30 minutes and they came up with a list of things that you would expect, like more product training, more inventory on the good stuff, enhanced marketing funds, salesperson incentives, and special promotions. Nothing too earth-shattering here. But what struck me at this incredibly high-level meeting was there was no PowerPoint, there were no graphs. It literally went down in 2 sentences. We can't hit our sales numbers without our truck numbers. What do you need from us to help you sell more trucks? And what I find refreshing about simple language and why it fosters trust is when you're using simple language, there's nothing to hide behind. If you're all full of the business buzzword bingo, people can be like sort of struggling to be like, what is he saying? I'm sorry, how does that impact me? They're trying to figure out and decipher what you're actually saying. And it actually creates it or can create mistrust, whereas simple language, totally creates trust. So, I'm just looking at the audience responses here. Melissa's saying a balance of saying something I might not want to hear and something that would make me pleasantly surprised is what would help me to feel like the person is trustworthy and reliable. Yep. And Romeo, again, clarity of objective, not just the simple language. I agree with all of that. But the 2 key points that I wanted to make here was talk straight and use simple language. It's amazing how refreshing that is and how that can foster trust. So let me just advance the slide here. Kimberly, when we were talking yesterday and kind of practicing this session, and Keisha and I were talking about the importance of vulnerability trust, you threw in a comment about making room for change, and I want to hear about that. And I know the audience does too.
Okay. Yes, I'd like to share. I think right now, as we all log in today and we're listening to some of this, it seems like common sense, but really it's about making room for change. How can we change our approach in the way that we communicate with our team? Trust is built through consistent words and our actions, but they have to match. I cannot trust you, Kelly, if you say one thing and turn around and do another.
That's really true. And I will tell you, and any person who's ever been in a leadership position knows that all of your team is watching you all the time.
Right.
And they're watching and paying attention to 2 things. They're listening to what you say and they're watching what you do. And if those 2 things are in conflict, they don't gel because you're saying one thing and doing another. They put more weight behind your actions, not your words, because words are cheap. And so they're going to watch what you do. And if they have to choose, and they're not aware of this, but in their mind, because we like logic, if they have to pick one camp, what's he doing versus what's he saying, they're going to go with what's he doing. And that's what they're going to believe is actually happening. So I agree with you that, it's about making sure that everything that you're asking your team to do and everything that you are doing yourself, that your actions reflect that. And I just found this really great quote from H. Burke Peterson, that if our words are not consistent with our actions, they will never be heard above the thunder of our deeds. And so I don't know how you actually can lead a team if they don't trust you. And when you say things, they kind of poo-poo them because they've been down that road before and those words didn't mean anything. So speaking of, either friction or groups that don't always get along, I want to talk about something else that people don't usually want to talk about. And that is, how do we smooth over the rough spots? We talked about people feeling discomfort, but what about if I'm actually working with Kimberly or Keisha or anybody else, and we just get to an impasse? we just come to a head like this. We cannot agree on an approach or a solution or, anything. And we're in our little camps. So I was taught that these are polite words. My parents actually taught me, when you find yourself in a situation where you just are at an impasse with someone, here's what you say, Kelly. You say to them, let's agree to disagree. That's what they taught me to say. And they're polite words, and I know what they were getting at. They should work, those words, but they don't. And here's why. If I say to Kimberly, Kimberly, well, let's just agree to disagree, shall we? Number one, it sounds really snotty and it sounds really dismissive, right? I'm like, obviously, Kimberly, you're too stupid to see that I'm right. Like, that's what it comes across like. But also, more importantly, it's a conversation ender. If I say, Kimberly, let's just agree to disagree, shall we? She knows loud and clear that this conversation is over.
Mm-hmm.
And in business, we should never have the conversation be over, even if we don't see eye to eye. Even more importantly, if we don't see eye to eye, the conversation has to continue. We can always get to a better place if we can keep talking. So here's a better way. Stop saying agree to disagree and replace it with I see it differently. Because if you say I see it differently, it's not antagonistic, right? And it's not dismissive. I'm not going, well, let's just stop here. It's not judgmental or superior. I'm not trying to project that I'm right and you're wrong. It's not combative in any way. And super plus, I'm not even trying to win the argument or persuade you over to my point of view. I'm simply making a declarative statement that I see it differently. So look at this example here. I love this graphic. Is it 6:06 or is it 9:09? Depends on how you see it. Mm-hmm. It's possible for two people to look at the exact same thing and see it differently. And that doesn't make one right and one wrong. And the other byproduct of this is if I say to Keisha, Keisha, I just see it differently. I promise you that Keisha is going to say, Keisha, here you go. I see it differently, Keisha. You say,
well, help me see it your way. Let me understand what you're seeing.
Exactly. She's going to say something like that. Tell me how you see it. Share with me your point of view. And the point of that is the conversation will continue. And it's respectful, it's professional, and it moves mountains. So stop saying agree to disagree, start saying I see it differently, and you will see some pretty big changes because people want to get to a point of agreement. They want to get to solutions. And this is the way forward on that. Lastly, I just want to add in 4 more magic words. Those 4 are pretty darn good, but here's 4 more that work like magic. And those 4 words are I need your help. So stop saying, can you help me? And say instead, I need your help. And here's why they work differently. Can you help me is a yes or a no question. So if I say, let me go back to you, Keisha, again, if I say to you, Keisha, no, let me phrase it this way. If I say to Keisha, can you help me? Here's what she can say. She can say, well, I'd love to, Kelly, but I got to get these numbers to Kimberly because we have a meeting tomorrow morning and she wanted to see these tonight. And you know how she gets when she doesn't get the numbers in time, like, woo, yeah. So I would, if I could, because I love you, Kelly, but I am on deadline here and I just can't. So when you say to someone, can you help me? You can legitimately get a no. And they may really want to help you, but they can't. And they can say no. So the better way of saying is I need your help because it literally puts the other person in a position of helping. So in that same example, if I say to you, Keisha, now, Keisha, I need your help. What are you going to say?
How can I help you? What do you need help with?
Boom. What do you need? What's going on? How can I help? Some version of that. Here's what I promise is never going to happen. You are never going to say to anybody, I need your help. And they're going to go, no. It's not going to happen. Yeah. We are hardwired as human beings to help each other. It's how we've actually survived as a species for, ever. So when you say to someone, I need your help, they are enlisted. They are now enlisted in helping you. And let's just say that actually once I explain to Keisha what I need, she actually can't help me. She's not the keeper of the data or the numbers or whatever, but now she's an emotional investor. And so she'll say, you know what? I don't actually have those numbers, but let me tell you who does. Brian in accounting was just talking about these the other day. Let me get him on board. And all of a sudden she's helping me get to the answer. Yeah. These will open doors for you in a way that can you help me never will. So between I see it differently and I need your help, change your language and you'll see your leadership approach change as well. So I want to leave and wrap up with, and then we're going to take your questions, time permitting, my favorite African proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go farther, go together. And you know that, or you wouldn't be on this webcast. So now, do we have some time for questions? I think if you have some questions, put them in the Q&A, and Kimberly will moderate that for me, and we'll see what we have. And let me also stop sharing now. so that you can see us, and we'll look at, oh, here's the chat. Let me see what we've got here. Just a couple of thoughts of the chat. I love the audience interaction here. Romeo said, I need your help makes the other person feel more valued too.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also said, agree to disagree results in no decision. Okay, Romeo, you're hired for the next webcast. You don't need us at all. I'm not sure why you're even on this webcast. All right, Kimberly, do we have questions?
We do have a couple. One of these is about, do we have time to talk about trust that may have been lost? So I think, we can kick that back to the team. There is probably some follow-up we can do here with any of the questions and answers we don't have time to get to. But I think right now what we want to focus on is simple, effective things that are teachable, right? How can you all walk away with something that was cost-effective yet teachable to help your teams and help you grow as a leader? Does anyone have any, Kelly or Keisha, do you have any comments about the question we have about trust that may have been lost along the way?
Whew. Keisha, do you want to take that, or do you want me to go first?
I think it goes back to the point I made earlier, as being transparent. I think it's very important to also say where you've gone wrong, and being vulnerable. And so I think going back to individuals within business, a client, a team member, and just having that opportunity to kind of share the angle or perspective that you were coming from, and where things crossed or where things didn't really align. I think that would be great. We've covered so many great tactics and strategies. These things go across any industry. They're applicable. So I would say, based on the notes, based on the things that we've shared today, they're free, you can apply them. But I think it really kind of goes back into, just thinking about the different perspectives of individuals, bringing in that piece around the vulnerability, being transparent, talking straight, and having that sit down conversation with that individual to let them know what your intent was and what your purpose was, and then to be able to stop and pause and allow that person to come back and share where they were coming from. But it's about that honesty there and that trust, which is important.
Can I weigh in with just one more comment? I underscore everything you said, Keisha. And I think that a lot of leaders, especially oftentimes people in more junior roles or maybe new to leadership, they don't realize that they have the power to say, I'm sorry, or I didn't handle that as I wish I had. And I think that there is, and if you think about any relationship, if you have a relationship in your life, a partner, a spouse, or a close friend or whatever, when you blow it, and you want to repair that relationship. And so if the trust has been lost and you feel that, I think there's a conversation that can be had where you're sitting down with that person and saying, if I had that situation to do over again, I would have handled it differently. And I wanted to apologize to you for that, because I've learned from that. And I feel that I have probably eroded some of your trust, and I understand why. And what I'd like to do is get back on track with you. And here's how I intend to do that. I want to sit down with you, once every week and do a status meeting or whatever to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But think about how impressive that would be if somebody came to you and said, I've been reflecting on our last meeting or something like that, and I blew it. And I want to apologize to you because I didn't handle that the way that I should have. I think that it's going to take time to restore that trust. Again, it's not flipping a switch, but it's a heck of a start.
Yep.
So other questions, Kimberly?
I think we've covered those that we have the time to cover today, Kelly. There's some good topics. And like I said, I'd like to revisit that with our team and come back and maybe think about how we can address some of those questions at a later webinar.
Okay. Then thank you so much, everyone, for joining with us today. And let me just go back to sharing screen real quick. Let's see, here we go. I just want to say thank you again to C2FO for actually hosting this wonderful, wonderful meeting, and for inviting all of us, and for our panelists. And thank you, Keisha and Kimberly, for your insights. You're just absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panel of Kelly, Keisha, and Kimberly for the conversation and insights into this meaningful topic. And thank you to you, our attendees of this webinar. If you'd like to revisit this content or share it with others, it will be available later this week on the Resource Center page of the C2FO website. And if you have just a few moments, a 5-question survey will be presented once this webinar ends. We would certainly appreciate your feedback and comments. Thank you again for all that participated. Have a great rest of your week.